Alright, and so what you want to do is, of course, we got our unlaminated elevon, we got our laminate here, and you want to cut a section of laminate, and I generally measure with my elevon. I always account for about a 1/4 inch overlap on the leading edge of it. Lay it down, fold it over, and you want to make sure you have more than enough laminate for wrapping all the way around your elevon. So I'm basically going to start with lining up my laminate and giving myself again about a 1/4 inch overlap past the front edge of the elevon. And then I'm going to come in with my iron here, and I'm going to just tack the center section of that laminate down. And then, still holding that laminate smooth, sometimes you got to kind of spread your fingers outwards to kind of bring the laminate taut so that you can laminate down without wrinkles. And this is a similar concept to applying vinyl graphics or stickers or anything like that. Is you want to make sure that you start from the center and work your way out to avoid air bubbles as well as wrinkles. And you want to basically kind of pull on it a little bit with your thumbs as you're heating it, just to make sure that it stays nice and tight against whatever you're laminating, in this case an elevon. And another thing you don't want to do too is you don't want to pull this too tight, because the laminate will stretch when it's heated. It will soften quite a bit. So one thing you want to try and avoid as well is that laminate actually stretching as you're heating it. And this is something that just takes practice. It took me a while to get to the point that I could laminate without air bubbles, and sometimes I still get air bubbles. Sometimes there's not much you can do about them. And so now that we get that tacked on there good, you just want to come in right at the tip here, make yourself a cut. Make yourself a cut right at this tip. Then you want to make another cut coming into that tip there. And you'll see what I'm doing here in a second. I'm actually going to take just a little bit of this excess laminate off here just so it's easier to work with. And you'll notice I'm cutting in at an angle here. I'm actually matching this edge. I'm coming out 90 degrees from this edge here and cutting in. And this doesn't matter too terribly much. This is just how I prefer to do it. And so now, by making my cuts like that, I don't know if you could really see, by making my cuts like that, I now have this large flap here in the front that can be flipped up and laminated onto the leading edge of your elevon. You also have this flap to cap the end. And we're going to do another set of cuts on this end here, very similar to what we did on the other end. I'm just going to trim off the excess just so it's easier to work with. And then come approximately 90 degrees from that edge. And leave yourself plenty to make up for the thickness of the elevon on the end there to cap the end. Now I usually just start with the front at this point, and you basically want to try and hold this as tight as you can, as flat as you can against that elevon, and just kind of roll over the front edge. And you want to kind of be applying forward pressure on your iron as you push it over that leading edge, because your iron will pull on the laminate slightly as well. So you could use the slight pull of your iron to your advantage to kind of give that additional pull to manipulate your laminate where you need it to be. So you just kind of work your way down. And once you get to the end and you already got it started good, sometimes you can just take the full length of the iron and just slowly roll it over that edge to get that tacked down. And on the other side, I got it started enough, I can again just roll it up over that edge And again, you want to look for pulling that iron in the direction you're rolling. So you want to kind of pull up and over with your iron, and roll it right over into place. And now we got that leading edge completed, and we can tack down the sides. And again, pulling over that bottom edge, you just want to pull your iron out and up. And trim off our excess. And we are good to tack this and start rolling this right on over.
Beautiful. Now you're still on.
Alrighty, and so for this back edge, what we want to do is we want to get a hold of this laminate, and right now I actually have a little bit too much. It's just a little frustrating to try and work with, so cut off as much excess as you need to for you to be able to work with it comfortably. For me, I personally like to have just about a 1-inch overhang, maybe slightly more, just so I have enough to grab onto, but not so much so that it's actually getting in my way. So that's a little bit better. And you want to kind of pinch this sheet and then get your finger on the leading edge of that, and you want to push forwards with your fingers so it pulls the laminate tight, and then you're able to basically roll your thumb on it there and keep it flat to the laminate. It's a little bit of an awkward way to hold it, but you hold it like that and just start from the bottom, start slowly heating it and rolling it over that trailing edge. You want to make sure that it's tacked on that trailing edge pretty well, because a lot of times when I see bubbles starting to form on these elevons, it'll happen on that trailing edge first. Usually happens on the leading edge or on the trailing edge. And so once you get that tacked on, your laminate will pretty much want to kind of fold over and want to lay semi-flat. But then that's when you basically kind of pinch the laminate again, and you just want to pull it enough to make sure that it's flat against the balsa, not so much so that you're going to stretch it, and get a good area tacked in the center. I generally like to tack another area slightly out from center on both sides. And once you get it started, you can pretty much always move from the back towards the front in the case of the elevons. That way, if you do get any air bubbles, it's going to push them out instead of locking them in. And then down here as well. Always moving from back to front. And when in doubt, come in at a slight angle over that edge just in case you think it's not locked in properly on the rear, and roll up and over. Is the bottom of the elevon. So again, you just want to kind of hold it tight over the front edge, and at this point we're back to where we started, and that 1/4 inch overlap that we had on the front of this elevon is tacked onto this surface that we are now laminating to. So if you did it right, you should be tacking to approximately half balsa and half laminate, and your seam is going to be right on this edge. And this is our hinge right here, so that seam is going to be pretty much invisible unless you point it out to somebody. So by doing it this way, it gives the illusion of a seamless fit. do it good enough, you might just be able to tell people that they're plastic, that they're solid plastic, and they might end up believing you. So once we get that all tacked down on that leading edge, it's pretty much done. We just have to trim it out. The only other thing I do here is I leave a little bit of excess on the end. And on the very front is where I trim it off even. And if you get it started to where you can just zip across with your scissors, generally you can do that, and that will leave you with virtually no excess on that edge. But what I still do is, even after I trim it, I always come back and roll my iron over that edge, just in case there is a small bit of laminate that has not tacked down completely. I always make sure that's on there solid. And so now that that's done, you just want to make a slit coming right in and matching up right with that corner there. So you'll end up with a flap here and a flap here. And it doesn't matter if you start with large flap or small flap. I generally like to do the smaller flap first, just so the larger one can hold it down. And again, as much as you can, try and work from the bottom up and pull that laminate with your iron as you roll it over. And once you get it where you want it, trim off your excess, roll that corner, and that end is done, and you are pretty much seamless at this point. And you just get the other side, and I'm actually going to clean my iron off. What I do here is I have a little bit of xylene. You can use goof off too. Goof off works really well. I just put it on a paper towel, and if you start getting some of the adhesive from the laminate on your iron, this will get it right off. Just try not to breathe the fumes as much as you can avoid. Yeah, goof off or xylene, both of them work pretty good. Though xylene is probably a lot more dangerous than goof off. And you are done. That is your first elevon. So you just repeat the same steps for the other side and you are set. Now we're going to start paying more attention to our motor mount here. I've already got this pre-prepped, pre-painted, so we're ready to go ahead and start laminating this. However you want to prep your plane, a lot of people like to use 3M90 before they go ahead and start painting. So whatever you're using, 3M90, I think some people said they used, I think it was Minwax or something, some sort of like a acrylic sealer or something like that. So whatever you're doing, just do your prep, do your paint, and then we'll just lay a sheet of laminate right over top of it, get an idea where we need to trim it. And I like to just trim off the excess right away, just so I don't have a whole lot of stuff getting in my way as I'm laminating this. And if you rounded this out right, you should pretty much be able to go ahead and just tack down the top and then start slowly working with it and rolling it over that edge. And don't pay too much attention to the front of the motor mount at this point, because we'll do our trimming later and get that tacked down. You want the first 3/4 of the mount is what we're trying to get laminated smoothly right now. And just take it slow and just keep rolling that laminate right over that edge and working it in. And you want to try and support the foam such that it doesn't warp too much as you're laminating, because you want this to hold its shape as best as possible. that. And so I generally only roll the laminate about 1/4 of an inch under the motor mount here on either side. And it doesn't have to be exact. You just want to leave enough excess to get a little bit of grabbing power on the bottom side of that. Again, just trim off about 1/2 inch. About 1/2 inch there. Man, that darn fly. I'm gonna kill that sucker. Alright, and then I generally like to come in about 3/8 of an inch off of the edge of the mount. Make a slit there. Make a slit here. And then what that enables you to do is on this corner, you can just roll this right up and over that edge and get your other side here while holding that middle flap up. Roll that over that front edge, and you can take that middle flap and roll that straight over in the center. Then what you want to do is take and make a slice straight towards the corner of your mount on both edges there. We got a fly on the camera. So since we already have those 3 individual flaps going, we'll just continue them on around that edge. And I just want to trim so I have a little bit less actually going around that edge. And just heat it gently and roll it right over. And you don't want to use much pressure on this edge. It's very, very thin up here, so you can deform it very easily. So once you get that and you're happy with it, we'll go ahead and I'm just going to trim a little bit more of the excess off of this here. Sorry, I'm getting out of the camera. Alright, and so now we're going to make another cut straight into the corner over here. Cut straight back. And same thing on the other side, straight into the corner. Just removing that back corner of the laminate. So now I'm going to do a cut about every 1.5 inches. And you don't have to worry about being super precise with this. Just get an approximate. And then just one section at a time, pull it up and over that corner and tack it down. And on these motor mounts, due to the round shape of them, it's going to be difficult to get every single wrinkle out of them, so pick and choose your battle with it. This one here came out pretty good. I still have a couple little wrinkles in it, but just pick and choose your battles with them. A lot of times if you sit there and obsess over every single wrinkle, sometimes you can actually just make it worse. So best thing is try and get it as best you can first time around, and if you have a couple little wrinkles, you know, heat them up, try and get them out. But if you just can't seem to get them, it's best to just stop, because a lot of times when it starts to cool it can actually start to get worse. And then on the trailing edge you want to leave more like 1/8 of an inch overlap. You don't want to have much overlap on the trailing edge at all. You want to leave very, very little. And then we're going to make a slot about every 1/4 inch here. We're going to make a cut. And this will enable us to fold these over, and it'll still keep a very round shape. And again, work with one at a time. And this is where it gets tedious. But we only have 2 of these halves to do. And again, you try and keep just a little bit of forward pressure on it and push it up and over that edge. And then once you get it, you can just kind of apply a little bit of pressure evenly to it and lock them all down. And that is one side completely laminated. And of course the bottom is bare, but that's what you want. You have about 1/4 inch laminated in, but you want the bottom of it bare foam. That's what's going to be glued to your plane later on. And now we'll move on to the top side. So there we go, we got our 2 halves laminated and ready to go on the plane. And on this one here, just one small point, the laminate I did bring over top of those spars, and mine, they just barely clear the edge, and I got them tacked onto the foam. I would definitely account a little bit of extra length on your overlap so you can get just a little bit of extra distance over that spar to help further lock that into place. But other than that, these are set. You can set these aside for when you have your plane finished. You want to start, just start right in the center, tack yourself down a small area here, and just make sure you get yourself started easily here. Once you get that center section tacked down, you want to just kind of spread that laminate out, pull it taut, and just keep just a little bit of pressure on it, and keep spreading it out to avoid those wrinkles. Because this is the crucial point once you're actually starting on it, is to keep those wrinkles out of where you're actually laminating. Another thing to keep in mind too is as you heat it, it will shrink slightly. It doesn't shrink much, but you will get just a little bit of shrinkage on it. So you want to make sure that you keep that in mind too while you're laminating. So I generally take and just laminate irons width out on one wing, and then I come on the other side and I do the same deal. And just irons width, and just make sure you're pulling that laminate taut. And you want to come right about the center of your wing cord here. And so once you get that done, I generally like to work with the front of the plane first, but I'll go ahead and grab my trusty scissors. And I generally try and leave about 1.5 to 2 inch overlap here, just so I have plenty for me to be able to get hold of and pull on later. Most of laminating is actually not your iron, but what you do with your other hand. So in the center on this one, what I do is I just hold it a little bit snug and just work the laminate right up to the edge of that battery bay. And you want to do the same on the wing panel and just start slowly working your way out from the center. And so then what I'll do once I come up to the edge of that battery bay is I'll find the seam in between your center pod and your wing panel, and just follow that seam, and I just cut it right back about halfway down the battery bay. And then that gives you this nice flap here that you have to deal with just this one wing panel. So then I'll take my wing here, and again, working in the center and holding that laminate taut, you want to just start slowly working that laminate towards your leading edge there. And I generally like to come over just a short distance, tack down another section, and then I just slowly side to side work that section out. And again, with your other hand, it's very important, hold good consistent pressure with this hand here, so that you don't get wrinkles. That's probably the most important part with laminating. And right here, I'm not pulling straight down, I'm kind of pulling in a diagonal off this direction, just so I don't get any wrinkles in here. Again, tack that down, and shift your positioning, and still holding light pressure. Tack that on down, and you don't have to worry about rolling this all the way around the leading edge at this point. Just get it down right to your leading edge. And then I'm going to come in right up again to the edge of that battery bay and start slowly working this in. And again, take your time on this, take as much time as you need. The biggest thing is trying to keep the wrinkles out of this, because the less wrinkles you have, the faster you'll go. And on this plane flying on 3-cell, it's going to be more sensitive to drag than a 4-cell plane would be. So you just want to keep that in mind too. So now you want to cut just that corner off. And you want to cut this such that, and this is where you kind of test fit it too, when you wrap this laminate around the leading edge here, you want the laminate seam to follow the seam in your airframe here. And so right now you can see once I get down to this point, I have a little bit of overlap, so I'm just going to trim that out a little bit more. satisfactory. And I'm just going to finish up my wing on this side here. Again, hold that light pressure on the front of your laminate so you can get that tacked down smooth. And start at the bottom here. Slowly work this on out. And this is a slow process. You get faster at it over time. And I'm, of course, moving extra slow here so y'all could see. Alright, and so there is the front edge there is done, at least for now. And so I'm going to go ahead and just cut a little bit of this trailing edge out just so it's not in the way. Get rid of that. Now on the other side here, again, just going to trim up following that seam line on your plane, cutting about halfway up into your battery bay area, just so you get that flap to work with. And again, starting at the center, hold light pressure, work your way out. Same process as the other side. Again, I can't say it enough. Just take your time, be patient with this. It's time consuming, it's going to take a while. This is probably the longest portion of the build. But this is one of the most crucial parts here, because your laminate is where you can gain a lot of drag or lose a lot of drag. But it's also where you can warp your plane. There's a lot of things that can go wrong while you're laminating, so that's why it's very important to just take it slow to make sure everything's done right the first time. Anyone that's watched an Alex Greaves video will notice that I'm moving a lot slower than he does when he's laminating. And yes, it does take me a lot longer to laminate a plane than it does for him too. But blooper reel. So I think a blooper reel at the end would definitely be a funny thing to put in.
I'll probably fade the audio out of this part and speed it up just a tad.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Because yeah, it's very tedious for sure.
Yeah, but it's good to see your technique.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty awesome.
Come on, fingers, get on there. So now I'm going to make my slit, and I want to come up, oh, I'd say probably about 2 elevon lengths. So approximately probably about 3 inches up from trailing edge of the plane, and again I'm following that seam line from where the wing panel meets the center pod section, and I'm just working with the wings right now, so I'm not worried about any of this. I'm just worried about getting the wings straight. And again, you want to start in the center with these fingers. Just pull, give a little bit of pressure on it just to make sure that that laminate's going to tack down properly and not give you any wrinkles.
Why don't you tell them why you're not, or what's different about as far as like Alex is, like say, say that, you might want to say, hey, you might notice that I'm not doing the elevons at the same time.
Okay. Alright, you might notice that I'm not just directly laminating my elevons onto this. The way I prefer to do it is I like to laminate my elevons separate, and it basically just gives you a little bit better bond when you put your elevons on. If you laminate them separate and your elevons and your wing are 2 separate laminated pieces, you're going to be connecting them, of course, with laminate, but then you're going to have a laminate on laminate bond for your hinge, which pretty much will not pull away. You'll rip your laminate before you pull it away from itself. And so what you end up with then is, if your laminate starts to bubble off of your airframe or starts to bubble off of your elevons, you're still going to have that laminate attached to the plane. So it might start flying a little funky, but you're still going to have control, and you'll be able to bring it home in one piece. And so this is basically just a safer way to do it. Just ensures that you have a higher chance of recovering your plane. A little bit longer lasting too. The only downside is it does take just a little bit longer. And just bring that laminate right on down, tack it onto that drag reducer well. And don't worry too much if this starts to curl up, because it should want to do that. So don't panic if it does. I'm just going to hit this with a little bit of heat, make sure that's tacked down right up to that leading edge. So now same deal on this side, just hold that little bit of pressure on there just to ensure that laminate goes down smooth. And so I'll show you how I do my hinges once we get this frame here completely laminated. I discovered that if you do your hinges backwards, well, backwards process-wise from what you'd normally do them, you actually end up with a better hinge line. And I'll show you what I mean by the process being backwards and putting them on in a second. Definitely takes a little bit of practice to do, so definitely take your time with it if you choose to do it the way I do it.
go ahead and tell them we're going to speed the video up a little bit. And everything. So that it, whatever.
Alright, and we'll go ahead and speed the video up here in a second, and that way we can shorten our build video time by a little bit.
That's good. Probably put that little audio clip in towards
You
the
could always
beginning.
do like voice over it too.
Mhm. Well, that's why I'm recording through this. I'll take snippets out of this audio recording and put them where I want, where I need to. So you'll probably end up talking over what you're doing as the video is moving faster. So it'll be similar to a voiceover, except you won't be there. So you can keep talking about laminating if you want to, and I can use that over top of there.
I'll just say a bunch of worthless things.
There you go.
Maybe some of it'll make it in, some of it won't. I'm surprised I haven't burned myself yet. Usually I've burnt myself a couple times by now. But I'm moving a little bit slower than I normally do. Just so what I'm doing is actually visible. I actually don't move a whole lot faster than this when I'm laminating. It just takes me this long. But I also go OCD on my laminate. And like these little wrinkles here are kind of bugging me. There's not a whole lot I can do about them now.
It's 10 times better than anything I've ever done. At least.
Well, it's one of those things too that the person actually doing the work sees all the mistakes he's making. So, for me, it probably just looks 10 times worse than what it does for you. So, on the leading edge of your battery bay here, you just again want to hold this snug going over top of your battery bay. And the biggest thing here is we want to make sure we don't deform the shape of the wing that much. So you want to keep a little bit of pressure, but again not too much, and just start slowly working this over the leading edge of your wing here. And I'll usually come back and just heat up the rest of that laminate with that battery bay. Now what I could do is go ahead and trim out and leave only the excess that I need. On my trailing edge, once again with the 1/4 inch rule, I usually trim this and leave about a 1/4 inch excess to laminate over the trailing edge of the wing. For the drag reducers, I generally will come in right on the edge of the corner of it and then taper it outwards slightly. That way I get good coverage over it. And again on the trailing edge here, I actually use even a little bit less than the 1/4 inch for this trailing edge. I go more like 1/8 of an inch on this edge. And yes, I just toss my scraps on the floor. About 1/4" overlap on this side. And on the wing tips, I generally lean towards about 1/8 of an inch overlap on them as well. Got him. Done. Blooper reel. And as you work your way towards the leading edge, when you're doing your cuts for the edge, you want to decrease the width of your slices here. So for example, I did a snip here, I did a snip here, I did a snip here. But then it's starting to get into the sharper curve here. So I did a snip here, snip here, snip here, snip here. And you basically want to make it so that when you fold these over, you're not going to have any harsh edges on your wingtip. And so I'm actually going to take this leading edge right here right now, and I'm going to continue pulling this laminate over it, and I'm going to work with it so it's right over the very tip of the leading edge, and you want to take it about halfway over or slightly over halfway across the leading edge. So once you do that, you could come in, and then it's actually easier for me to do it this way, and trim off, and again just leave about 1/8 inch or so overlap. You want this to end up overlapping to where it comes just past that leading edge of the wing, because we're going to laminate the bottom, and we're also going to overlap the bottom slightly over onto the top, so you get it good and locked in, but yet your seam will end up just over top of your leading edge and will be pretty much invisible, and it'll look like you have a seamless airplane. So yeah, I use pretty much one full uninterrupted sheet on the top and on the bottom. I just have a few small slits in it from where the seams match up. And I'll show you what we do with those once we get this completely laminated. And so just fold those individual lips over on your leading edge. That way all that's flush. Clean my iron off a little bit. Then on the trailing edge here, again you want to take just a short section in the center, pull up and over to get that tacked, come over a little distance, pull up, over to get that tacked on the back side, and do that the whole way down your trailing edge. And you don't need to use a lot of pressure while you're laminating either. You want to firmly press your iron into your foam, but you're not trying to bend anything or force the laminate down into the foam. You just want to make sure that the laminate's making good solid contact with it for that adhesive to bite. You don't have to sit there and push your laminating iron all the way to China. That would be my new saying. Push your laminating iron all the way through to China. And then right on this edge, again you want to be gentle with it since the foam is very thin right here, and just lock that laminate around that edge. Then on our trailing edge right here, similar story. Very, very, very light pressure. Let the weight of the iron and the heat of the iron do the work for you. And just slowly wrap this around the trailing edge of that plane. And try and be careful not to let your iron hit the foam. If it does, just get a paper towel, put a little bit of actually rubbing alcohol will work well too. But I use either xylene or goof off. That seems to work the best for getting paint and adhesive off of your iron. So again, with the trailing edge, work back and forth as you roll that over the trailing edge. Take your time, make sure it's perfect. There's not a whole ton of overlap here, so I just can't say it enough. It's just take your time. Time spent here is time lost on the track. And don't insult me too bad for my paint job. I just slapped this together real quick just so I can get you all this build video. I generally like to do something a little bit more complex with my paint schemes, but this one here will end up just being a little beater plane for me. Probably going to put a multi-rotor motor on it. Who knows, I might try and do something crazy with it, like maybe I'll try and experiment with fitting a 4-cell battery in it. Yeah, this thing, I know people are going to do it. I know there's going to be those crazy people out there that the handling of this plane will not be enough to satisfy them. They're going to want to go 160,000 miles an hour, and they're going to put 4-cell in it. And yeah, they're going to be screaming. But the biggest thing is this airfoil is not particularly well suited for speed. It can handle it. It does just fine. But I can't say this thing would be all that stable if you started pushing it up over the 140 mark. You're probably going to start getting some fluttering. And not from elevons or anything like that. Fluttering from literally just the airfoil being oversped. So yeah, that's one thing I noticed on my spec wing actually, is my spec wing, it could have been due to the softer foam it's made of. But my spec wing, I put a 6x6 propeller on it, and probably was pushing around 100, 110 miles an hour. But at that point, it just started fluttering in the air. And I wasn't getting any flex from control rods or even the airframe. It was just the aerodynamics of it, it was just fluttering. And physically could not go any faster. So, turns out the spec wing, there is actually a speed limit on it that it really does not do well exceeding. Unless you add weight or something to it, then you might could push it past. Just going to trim the excess laminate here off. So now my seam, if you look at this from the top, my seam comes to right here, so just a little bit past the center point of your leading edge. That's about where you want it. So we got the whole top laminated there. The top of the plane is done. We are virtually wrinkle free, and we are pretty much set with that. And then the only thing we'll have to do is come back later, and we have these seams here that we cut out in order to fit our laminate down flush. We have the seams here we cut out. We have the seams up here that we'll end up cutting a cap and putting on later on. But for now, we'll go ahead and transition to the bottom and get that laminated. We may end up speeding the video up at this point to save a little time, because laminating the bottom is basically the exact same process as the top, except the bottom is actually a little bit easier.